what are we listening to today?
The Immigrant Project by Girish and Astha.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Project by Girish and Astha. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Dave. Dave is our flatmate and a dear friend. Dave is also a musician, and Dave, for his day job, works at a daycare, if I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken. Daycare.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dave, we are inviting you today to talk about your experience. Okay, for everyone who's listening, Dave, while holds a Canadian passport, also holds an American passport. So, in a sense, he is also an immigrant who came to this country a few years before we came. So, we're going to ask Dave some questions about his experience
Mhm.
of living here, finding a job, maybe love, life, relationship. Let's see where the conversation goes. So,
Sounds good.
yeah, Dave, over to you to give a 30-second introduction and then we'll get into the questions.
All right. My name's David Fort. I'm currently residing in Toronto. I'm originally from the United States, Minnesota in particular. Yeah, I'm an artist musician who tours their music as much as they can by canoe on river systems in North America, and that project is called Twin Twa. Yeah, and I do outdoor ed and various other kind of education on the side to maintain some kind of life on top of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Twin Tour, Dave, how long has it been since you named that group?
Probably like 14 years.
Oh wow. And how
Yeah.
long has it been since you first got into the industry, become a musician?
Oh, maybe 20 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
hmm
that speaks volume for the passion that you have for the industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I was
Yeah.
saying that you were born in American and you said that you were born in Minnesota. So
hmm
uh, I'm sure somewhere down the line that you or your family decided to move to Canada.
Yeah.
So
It was my mom's decision.
So how was
Uh,
that experience like? How old were you? Was it a good transition? Did you want to move up north?
I was pretty young, so I probably didn't like notice. Young as in an age where I wouldn't have noticed, extreme, like
Mm,
political boundaries. I'm sure my mom was dealing with those kinds of things as we moved from Minnesota to Manitoba. So geographically, it was quite a bit further. We moved way up to northern Canada, northern Manitoba, um, and so geographically speaking, it's rooted in itself. It's the Midwest,
yeah,
but heading north, but a vast cultural difference coming from Minnesota to northern Manitoba for sure. But I was still young enough to you know start to get integrated in those kind of communities before I'd fully started forming relationships outside of whatever ever. Most of my relationships was kind of family orientated in Minnesota, cousins and a few kids on the playground kind of stuff. But
So
yeah,
you were saying you were born in Minnesota, but you were raised in Manitoba. So
yeah,
if I were to ask you a question,
mhm,
describe your experience of being raised or your childhood in Manitoba. How was it like?
yeah. Well, it was a town called Flin Flon, Manitoba, and so small northern mining town up north. Probably now looking back for all I've traveled, probably pretty good for all intents and purposes. A time of relative wealth, relative safety in the community. We walked to school, we biked to school, we did all the stuff on our own without too much parental supervision. The town was small enough where, it had some rough mining town elements.
Hmm.
It wasn't very dangerous. And now I know I'm speaking from like a perspective of being white
Hmm.
up there, where I'm sure if I was indigenous, I probably would have been dealing. I feel like with different
Yeah,
economic things and violence towards me from authorities and school systems and stuff like that. So at the time I was growing up, I wasn't hyper aware of that. So from my perspective, for a long time, it was pretty good. Or I was going through a lot of trouble. I was going through a lot of major surgeries and that
hmm,
kind of thing. So to jump off, because I know you're sort of going to do some comparisons. Right, we lived here just long enough for me to get kind of annexed into
yeah,
the Canadian medical system. So
yeah.
I had major, like I'm talking major, like hip
Surgeries?
reduction, knee surgery, crazy growth plate surgery stuff to basically ensure I don't die. Um, um, and that would have been like probably devastating without insurance in the United States.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
probably,
Well,
yeah.
it's interesting you said something about having relatively better safety and wealth. But when I first thought about moving to Canada a few years back, I also had the same notion in my mind that this country is wealthy, the political system is great, and the lifestyle is of course superior. But
Mhm,
but some people, at least of late, have been criticizing the liberal government, saying that they have taken too much liberty with everything. And it's not the same Canada Canadians say was probably in the start of the millennia. So do you have some
mhm.
thoughts to share about that, or do you think it's the same?
Oh, it's definitely not the same, and it's certainly not just related to the Liberal government.
Okay.
Anything happening economically. Like honestly, when you kind of like for the most part, Canada flips back between Liberal and Conservative leadership
Hmm.
federally, and then of course the for people listening, then there's the provincial governments, and
Yeah.
oftentimes the NDP is a strong third party in the federal
Hmm.
elections, but the NDP can be very strong. Like it's just one in Manitoba. I don't know where it's BC stuff like that. So the New Democratic Party, plays its hand strongly in the provinces too. But for the most part, for leadership, whether it be total leadership or just partial leadership, it's liberal and conservative.
Yeah.
And honestly, uh, like there's obviously differences, but for the most part, policies as far as industry and growth go, they don't vary that much. So to completely put, I mean, things happening economically now are based on certain decisions that were made 40 years ago, or
Hmm.
like NAFTA or those kinds of things. And right
Yeah.
now I'm not even saying what's right or wrong about certain things, but
Yeah.
there are policies that are put in place that maintain like kind of how our economic growth goes and how it's distributed. But in general, having spent time in the United States and Canada, like there's just been a consistent my whole life, a consistent polarization of wealth, where the wealthier are getting wealthier, and the middle, whatever, the middle class is dying, but like and all that kind of stuff. So that has to do more in my mind with but just Canadian policy in general. So to just dump it on the Liberals or the Conservatives would be silly. It would be silly of me. I mean, generally, I guess like I wouldn't consider myself a liberal, but
Hmm.
but I would definitely never vote conservative. But it would be silly for me to go, oh well, good, it's not conservative, so that means everything's going to be okay. Like especially when you're speaking economically, I honestly think they work relatively close in tandem in far as how wealth disparity goes. Um, you can make arguments with the Liberal government that it's slightly better, but not enough for me to be excited about. Like, and I'll give you an example, like
Yeah.
the oil sands and the oil pipeline stuff. A lot
Yep.
of people are like, one of some of the anti-Trudeau or liberal sentiment is like, oh, he's going to shut down oil, and he's not. He's an oil expansionist. He's an
Hmm.
industrialist. So I, all those things are still happening. Those massive industrial efforts are still happening, but the wealth is just there's tons of wealth being created. There's tons of wealth here
So
in the
there's
United
there's a
States.
disparity in wealth.
Yeah. And anyways, to quickly answer your question, that's not a case of just liberals or conservatives.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
then you made an interesting point of middle class dying and the wealthy getting wealthier. So
Hmm.
and I know you are someone who's born and raised in a um rural area, and you are probably used to paying say $1 or $2 for a pack of milk. But now when you go to a grocery store, you have to shell out at least $7. So the
Right.
inflation somewhere over time has affected the pockets of the middle class.
Well,
So
and
how
everyone, yeah, yeah.
yeah, everyone. Yeah. So how
Uh,
how how bad do you think the inflation is at the moment when you compare it to say 15 years ago?
oh, pretty bad. And I think like it kind of like recently in the last 4 years or something. I can't remember all the dates, but like I think they kind of piggybacked off of COVID because it kind of felt like to me it was like COVID and and then so lots of stuff was shut down. It wasn't coming from other places. So
Hmm.
I guess there was this general understanding of why gas would be more, groceries would be more,
Yeah.
and then post COVID, they kind of coasted on the supply line, like kind of talk, like, well, we gotta wait till supply lines catch up, and now we don't even talk about that stuff anymore. Now it's just inflation. So they kind of like, they kind of get you used to, like, I remember gas got up to whatever $2.20 where I was living, and now
Hmm.
it's like receded back to like
One.
what
One
150
fifty. Yeah.
or something. So when you create like a mindset of that, well, I'm like, well, oh, I remember when it was 220, but prior to it being 220, it was sitting at about $1.05, $1.10, if that. Sometimes it was even below a dollar, not very much, but we'll call it $1.05, and that was just 4 or 5 years ago. So they really, I don't know why inflation truly happens in that, but they really piggybacked off of that, and like I think they just can capitalize on a public, like anything, on a public mindset, as best they can, and then they jab it into place, and it'll never come back. It'll never
Yeah.
come. It'll never come back for us. So
Oh.
it'll hold place, and it's just it'll push as far as it can go, and then once it locks, it
Yeah.
holds. That's all I've ever seen inflation ever do. And then, theoretically, we fight for our wages and go on strike and all that. But and then we take our concessionary,
Yeah.
I don't 4% increases, whatever it is, I don't know, but
Yeah.
not enough to keep up, in any sense of the imagination. Yeah.
Dave, for the listeners, I want to dive deep into the
Hmm.
topic of inflation while also slightly digressing. So, I don't know if you read the recent news. Inflation in Canada actually came down by 0.2%. I think it stands at 2.7, 2.8%, and mostly they are saying it's because of the exports that has happened to the US. So,
Hmm.
and and my second part of the question is, at one point several years back, the Canadian dollar and the US dollar were at par. $1 was $1, but
I
now
remember
the
that.
yeah, but now the Canadian dollar is slightly reduced, so it's like
It's greatly I think it's at like 72 cents or something.
72 cents. Yeah,
So that's
so
that's like,
we have now been considered as an inferior country to US in the North American region. So
mhm.
do you think that is true? And do you think Canada will ever get back to the level of $1 for the States? Because I know US has had
I
an unprecedented growth in the past several years, and Canada is at a stagnation at the moment.
I I don't know. I have no idea if, like, I am, who knows? Like, still to highlight like that wealth can be generated for Canada and the US and whatever nation on a certain level, and they can claim certain growth for a
Mm,
nation. But
yeah,
that doesn't mean that collective wealth is being distributed. So for someone like me being an artist and, like a worker in a school,
yeah.
that 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 sounds nice, I guess. Like, but it I don't know what does that mean? Is that a Boeing airplane bailout? Well, I don't know where that money ends up. Like, all I see is hospitals being closed. All I see is infrastructure. All I see is more and more people in the streets,
Yeah.
um, and that kind of thing. So sure, maybe the U.S. and Canada technically have whatever their GDP is going up, but I'm not seeing that in a value of humanity. I
Hmm.
so so I think industry, wealthy people, whatever, whoever it is, are just getting better and better at holding their wealth. And so, I mean, sure, that's nice if
I think for
inflation.
for for an outsider, for someone like me who's not stayed that long in the US or Canada, I feel the Canadian
Mhm.
government is doing more to distribute wealth, especially amongst people who are low wage,
Like
categorized as low wage. Yeah, low
in comparison to the United States.
in comparison to the United States. Like I was recently filing my taxes, and there are subsidies like GST rebates. There's carbon tax something. So we
Yeah,
do get, and plus there's free medical, of course. So
well, and,
US
and
doesn't have.
that's no, and of course, but and that's true. Like, yes, like Canada technically, does whatever, some people call it a socialist country or whatever. I don't really know what it's defined as, but yeah, I've lived in both, and I've recently lived in the United States, and it's absolutely like punishing you for being poor
Really?
there. Well,
Oh,
I think like it's really hard. Like it's like I've lived in Los Angeles, Minnesota, Northern California, New York. It's and I've been kind of broke down there, and I've watched people have like debilitating or like injuries who are like, I don't know, I'm just gonna tough it out. I'm not gonna go to the emergency room. I'm not gonna go to the hospital
oh
just to
no.
avoid that bill. But people are working three jobs, and then you get to crime and drugs and all that. And um, so yeah, there are more constructs in Canada that are in place, but like don't be. But that's not to be a Canadian. Be like just like, oh, like we're better than some country that technically is not treating its citizens very well. Um, I don't think that's a good place to. It's the country we're bordered with.
Yeah,
We're big trading partners with. We share a lot of cultural things. We're both from the British colony. They broke off. We didn't.
true.
Whatever. But like, just to come, it's. I find in Canada my whole life people have done that. Well, at least they're not shooting up the schools in Canada or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, well, at least we're not doing something really terrible. Like I just don't find that a great benchmark. And
Hmm.
kind of thing. And
Yeah.
honestly, we're especially in the medical. If you watch, they're systematically deconstructing the medical system to become more privatized. It's been happening. Like they're closing emergency rooms in Winnipeg, northern
Oh,
Manitoba. It's happening in Ontario. So like, yes, it's still better than the United States. Sure, I guess. And then people have long arguments about that, but yeah, you can still get certain things, but we can't we can't be like relax with that, like because
mm,
I don't think the United States is look how the United States is the wealthiest nation in the world. Now go walk around Philadelphia, go walk around Pittsburgh.
yeah.
So what does that mean?
I was
What
in
does that?
I was in New York recently and I saw so many people who were struggling to put food on their table.
Yeah, and where you were probably in Manhattan even.
Manhattan, yeah.
Yeah, so you were in the best part. You were in one of the highest tax bases, the highest property values in North America, and still there's abject poverty around it. That's what it's like in
So,
Toronto here. There's golden towers and all that, and
yeah.
and so I mean, hooray for some people's wealth. But yes, I think like Canada has a few more things to potentially protect. I guess that are in place, like more food protections, more things like that. And some people I think the primary argument, and it is true, it's worth noting that taxes are lower in the United States. So,
Yeah.
like, I remember like living in the States, and like it was so easy to get a car, and looking at property, and I'm like, I could have that. Like, it wouldn't
Really?
take me. Yeah,
Wow.
because there's so many affordable,
Yeah.
like if you don't want to live in Manhattan or something,
No,
of
of course.
course. Like, but so just to counter it a bit, I like some people are like, we have a higher tax things, and theoretically, us paying more taxes, in my mind, should lead to more whatever infrastructure
Infrastructure,
stuff,
yeah.
stuff for us, whether it be
Stuff.
free free toothbrushes or dentistry or whatever, but stuff for us because. And then it gets argumentative of who's paying the tax base and stuff. But the
Yeah.
U.S. the U.S. has lower tax, so that's often the counter argument. But you could spend hours
True.
just talking about that. So yeah.
True. Dave, I want to spend one episode dedicated to talk about your experience in the States,
Hmm.
especially those years when you toured in the States,
Yeah.
and those bands and what all you did in Los Angeles, New York,
Hmm.
etc. Wherever, even in South America, if you toured, any experiences. But that's for a different episode, and I'll come up with some questions for
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
But I want to conclude the conversation. But before I conclude the conversation, I want to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Now, being a true Canadian, what is the one thing that you are absolutely proud of this country?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you. Let me think about this for 10 seconds. I'm not a big nationalist in any regard,
Hmm.
so it's hard for me to to exude any kind of national pride. I've had
Okay.
too many experiences, like in Aboriginal, Indigenous, Native
Yeah.
American communities, like your
Mm.
term, and when I like truly kind of, to the best of my ability, understood the colonization and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
genocide, the G word, the big dog. I
Yeah.
mean, like, right now we're digging up
Graves.
the graves and that kind of thing. So I can't. I can speak to it in political like terms, because that's all a nation is to me. It's a
Mm.
construct of laws and things like that. So I can speak to what laws that I
Yeah.
see working in that, but I don't feel I don't feel like I'm passionate as a Canadian or an American for that. If any country I do, it would be the United States, because I was indoctrinated young. So like sometimes there's something weird about when it gets too young, and it happened to me in Canada too. And it don't get me wrong, it will come to me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a struggle um, that I go through sometimes.
Mm.
So I still will answer your question, but I will. So what? Um, I guess at this point it would be, and I don't know even know if Canada can take credit for this. It's I was very fortunate in my mind to grow up in space, like where there was space in the woods.
Mm.
But I can't give Canada credit
Yeah.
for something the creator or whatever it is made something so
Yeah.
beautiful for us. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
under the political boundaries that was Canada, I got to enjoy those freedoms in
Mm.
space. So I imagine there was something about the political construct that allowed me
Yeah.
to do that. So I guess thank you.
Wow. Yeah, that's a beautiful
Yeah,
answer, though.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. Thank you
Okay.
so much for being part of this podcast. And I'm going to invite you for a second recording very, very soon.
Oh, excellent.
Well,
I look forward to it.
you have a nice day, okay?
Yeah, you too, Girish. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye bye.